All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight for the latest event in the Blue Space Angler Event Series, Worcester Fisheries History. My name is Jacqueline Burmeister from the City of Worcester Department of Public Works and Parks, and I coordinate the Lakes and Ponds program. I'm here tonight with Morgan Proco of ESS Group, who will be leading the presentation. So we've had a lot of interest in this event this evening, and that's really exciting. In order to keep background noise to a minimum and give you the best possible experience, I have put you all on mute. However, there will be an opportunity at the end of the presentation to ask questions and use the hand raising option. There'll be an opportunity for you to speak then if you want. If at any point you have a burning question and you don't think you could hold on to it till the end, you can put that into the chat box. And I will read it out at the end. So the last thing is that this presentation is being recorded and will be made available to you on the Lakes and Ponds webpage for your reference later. So, and with that, I think we will begin. So, the City of Worcester sees its blue spaces, our waterways, as valuable assets. The Lakes and Ponds program is generally concerned with making sure that these resources are monitored and managed in a sustainable way that promotes both recreation and environmental services. The program works really closely with local watershed associations, which aim to protect and preserve our waterways. Collectively, we realize how important fish and fishing are to the local community and how water quality could impact fish health. And so we all joined forces and put together a series of fun events to engage new and existing anglers and connect fishery health with water quality issues. The 2021 Blue Space Angler Event Series includes 13 free, virtual, or socially distanced in-person events that take place throughout the year at our Worcester waterways and in collaboration with the other watershed groups in Worcester. They range from learn to fish events to biology-focused seminars, and so there really is something for everyone. And if you enjoy this event, we encourage you to check out wooanglerseries.com to learn about other upcoming events that may interest you. As part of the Worcester Fisheries History Initiative, we really wanted to better understand the population of fish in our water bodies and how it's changed over time. So we were determined to find out if water quality was playing a role in the fisheries health and if there were things that we can do to improve fishing in our lakes and ponds. We began by publishing an angler survey, which was completed by over 250 local anglers who responded to questions about what they were catching in the Worcester lakes. We took those results and passed them over to ESS Group, an environmental and engineering firm that has been working with the city for some time now. So they took those results and they analyzed and synthesized them with other available data to publish a report on the findings. Tonight, we're going to get a summary of those results from ESS environmental analyst Morgan Proco, who collaborated on the project. After she's done, we'll have some time to answer some questions that you might have about fisheries here in Worcester. So with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right, awesome. So as Jacqueline said, my name is Morgan Proco. I'm a staff scientist at ESS Group. We're an environmental consulting company. We do, specifically, I'm in the water resources group. So we do everything from plant mapping, looking for invasive plant species, water quality work, everything like that. We've done a lot of work with the city of Worcester. I spend my summers mainly taking samples of Indian Lake and Coes Pond for cyanobacteria and algae blooms. I know we've done some work for an alum dosing station, which I believe Jacqueline's going to touch on a little later in the presentation. But yeah, with that, let's jump right in. Jacqueline, if you could hit the next slide. Okay, awesome. So I created this presentation and then the report that went to Jacqueline as an overview of a couple different sources of data. So the first of that being the Angler Survey, which was done by some WPI students, as well as the Indian Lake Watershed Association and a couple other volunteers and people who were interested to see what was being caught in the lake. And it was all made up from survey people and the public took. And as Jacqueline said, they got around 250 responses, which is awesome. But that just gave us a nice overlook of what people were catching. I requested some historical data from Mass Wildlife. They gave us more of a total screenshot of the lake, some of the historical data, the fish surveys they've been doing. And that was very helpful to see how that's changed from what we're seeing in the angler survey, which was a little more recent. And then ESS Group, my company, looked at the trends between both of those, and then looked at some management recommendations to keep the lake looking great, to keep the fish communities healthy, all of that. And then one of the most interesting things we looked at was the sport fishing data, which was pretty cool. It showed the biggest fish being caught and all the records. It showed most recently up till spring 2020. So we have some pretty cool stuff that you could see. But yeah, I'll talk about that a little bit later. You could hit the next slide. All right, so jumping into Indian Lake, there was 3 surveys that Mass Wildlife had given me when I requested some data. So 2 in 2011 and 1 in 2017. These ones were done. There's a lot of different methods you can do to do these fish surveys. This one was electrofishing or boat shocking. So the simplest way to describe that, and I'm not a professional in electrofishing or anything like that, is they send out electrical currents from the boat. And it almost makes the fish like involuntarily move, like almost a muscle spasm, and it brings them towards the boat where they're able to scoop them up and measure them and document the species, and then release them back unharmed. It's, from what I understand, the most used recently, but that was used for all 3 surveys. I kind of made a little map over on the right side of the screen for the areas which they said that each survey took place. So that first one in 2011, they said took place kind of by St. Gobain, by the highway. They could have gone other places in the lake, but that's just where they mainly stayed. And that one, so there's 2 different types of surveys that I know of. So a total pickup is whatever they catch through that electrofishing, that boat shocking, they record, they take measurements of all of that. And then there's also selective pickup. So that's where they're looking for a certain type of fish. You'll see in that 2011 survey, the second one, they were looking specifically for largemouth bass. Maybe that was because they had reports of something like a health risk or some fishes being small, something like that, or they just wanted to check in on the population, see how many they had, or how many they could get in that short survey. That first survey from August 2011 was a total pickup. You see the lake is mostly dominated by yellow perch, white suckers, of course those common carp that we see a lot of in Indian Lake. And then the most recent 2017 survey was also dominated by yellow perch and carp, of course. So yeah, that's a little screenshot of what Mass Wildlife had given me based on their surveys. You could go to the next one. All right, and then this is a little overview of the angler survey data for Indian Lake. So the most recent data we have on what's showing up in the lake, what people are catching when they're fishing. The little pie chart on the left shows that we have most dominantly bass species, so those largemouth and smallmouth bass, and panfish. So panfish, I kind of broke them into broader categories just to help with the look of it, so it wasn't little tiny slices. But panfish can include anything from those black crappies and pumpkin seeds, bluegill, rock bass. I actually looked up why they were called panfish as well, because I was a little curious. I'm not a big angler myself, but they're actually called panfish because they're edible fish, but they usually don't outgrow the size of a frying pan. So anything around that size is considered a panfish. I'm sure there's also a more scientific background to that name, but that's the one I found, and it was a kind of interesting little fact. So those panfish take up a good quarter of the lake as well, and then you'll see some smaller species like we have 7% of northern pike, we have some yellow and white perch species, some carp, all of that. And then the other section is a few people commented they had caught other species which weren't significant enough to take up a slice of that pie. And so those can range from anything little fish like the banded killifish in other ponds and stuff like that. But as you can see on the right side, all three of the other lakes that I looked into had reports of being stocked, whether that's northern pike or trout, anything like that. Indian Lake does not have any reports by Mass Wildlife of being stocked for anything. It could have been happening in the past. We're not really sure, but as of what Mass Wildlife knows, nothing has been stocked recently, at least. And then there was a few species that weren't present in the angler survey. Those golden shiners, banded killifish, and white suckers. That could be for a number of reasons. It doesn't mean they're completely gone from the pond or anything like that. They hopefully weren't extirpated, which usually is not the case, but it was most likely, those are all smaller species in general. So anglers aren't really looking for them. So maybe just no one happened to catch those species, anything like that. There's a number of little cases that could have happened, but I'm sure they're all still present because they had been recorded from the fish surveys probably about 10 years ago. So it would be pretty tough for a whole species to just be gone from a lake. So the most likely case is that they were there, but they just weren't caught by anyone and weren't recorded in the fishing survey or the angler survey. All right, we can move on to the next slide. Okay, moving on to Coes Reservoir. So the surveys for this one were a little bit older, from the 50s and one from the 80s. So a little bit different looking at those versus the ones in like 2011. But these ones were used a couple different methods. None of the electrofishing was done here, but rather they used different nets. So the net pictured is a fyke net. And the fish kind of swim in there and get caught and get a little confused how to get out, and then all pool up at that end triangle where everything can be caught and ID'd and measured and all of that. One other interesting method they used, as you can see, chemicals was listed. So back in, I'm assuming the 50s, they would use chemicals and they would kind of just kill out everything in the pond. And all the fish would come floating to the surface and they could take them out and they could ID them and kind of get rid of those trash fish they may not want. And then they could just restock everything they do want in the pond, which wasn't the smartest idea, as you could probably imagine, just killing off the ecosystem. But it was done way back in the 50s, and they really got a full overview of what was in the lake because they took everything in the lake. So in that 1951 survey that you can see from August, they caught 584 bluegill. So they really got an outline of what was in the pond. So bluegill definitely was the dominant species, and white perch, black crappie were some big ones there. In 1956, they used a fyke net like the one shown on the right. They once again caught close to 1,000 bluegill, as well as 435 white perch and some yellow perch as well. So another full overview of what you were seeing. And then most recently, they use the electrofishing as well as gill nets, which I have a picture of in one of the next slides. But the dynamic of the pond changed a little bit where bluegill were no longer on top and white perch were the most dominant. That could be for a number of reasons as well. I know bluegill are a sunfish, so they like those open sunny spots. They like less plants and all of that. So maybe more invasive plants or plants in general started coming into Coes Reservoir, and the sunfish, including the bluegills, kind of died off. Something with water quality could have affected their population. But yeah, so that's a little overview of Coes from the 50s. If you wouldn't mind going to the next one. And then more recently, from last year, we can see that the pond is mostly dominated by the bass species again and panfish. So once again, those panfish are black crappies, pumpkin seeds, bluegill, and rock bass. So I'm guessing bluegills made up a majority of that pan fishing slice of the pie. And then black bass species, so the largemouth and smallmouth bass. We can also see a big chunk for trout species, which you can see on the right, or are being stocked in Coes Reservoir and have been stocked as recently as last spring. So that leads to some nice fishing for anglers to come in. It's not the deepest of ponds and lakes, but it can definitely hold the trout for a nice spring fishing session. Lots of areas for recreational fishing and all of that along Coes Reservoir. The only species that wasn't seen in the angler survey was the tessellated darter, which once again could have been there. Maybe we just didn't catch anything like that. It is another smaller species. Jacqueline, if you wouldn't mind switching to the next one. Okay, I think you might have skipped one. There we go. So Bell Pond is next. The only survey which I have record of from Mass Wildlife was in 1994. They used a few different types of nets. So you can see on that left picture, a gill net, which is anchored down and goes from the bottom over on the sand or the sediment all the way up to the top, and the fish kind of get stuck in it. So then they can go and ID them. And then on the right, a seine net, which makes almost like a half moon that can kind of corral all the fish in and ID them that way. Very similar net styles. Good way to get, especially fish closer to the shore. And this one was a total pickup event. So anything that got caught in those nets, they ID'd. They weren't looking for a specific species. And that one was actually dominated by the banded killifish and yellow perch. If you could go to the next one. And the little overview from the angler survey. Strangely enough, the only species that wasn't in the angler survey was the banded killifish, which was the most present in their survey done in 1994. Once again, for those same reasons, people might not have been out to catch that fish. I know I'm not the biggest angler. I'm not an angler at all, but maybe people were just catching those for bait fish or something like that. I believe they're a smaller fish. But this pond is mainly located, mainly has panfish, bass species, just like the others. And once again has those perch, the chain pickerel, the trout species, and it is being stocked for trout as well, as recently as last spring. So very similar to Coes Pond with the look of what's in the pond and what's being stocked. This one is a little more residential, I believe. So it has like the apartment building right next to it. And so that could have had to do with the banded killifish. But again, I can't make any assumptions for what was happening. If you wouldn't mind going to the next one, Jacqueline. All right, so our last of the 4 lakes that I studied was Lake Quinsigamond, obviously the biggest from what we can see. So there was 2 surveys that I could see from 2015 and 2018 where they used electrofishing. I kind of, based on the notes they had, tried to outline where they were doing the surveys, but once again, they could have gone to a bunch of different places, gone up and down the lake a little bit more. but that first one, they didn't give me any fish data for. So we know that they were out there and they definitely collected some stuff. I'm just not sure what was present. And they were selectively picking up something. I'm going to guess some more bass or something they had previously stocked, but I'm not completely sure. And then their 2018 one was a total pickup where they caught mostly bluegill, rock bass, and yellow bullheads. And Lake Quinsigamond has so many different areas. It's such a deep lake, but it also has small little shorelines and streams and plenty of area, different habitats for the fish to go in. So you'll see that on the next slide, they have a lot of different species that come into play. If you wouldn't mind going to the next one, Jacqueline. Yeah, they have a lot of species and a lot of variety in the fish that they have. With the depths being so deep, they have a nice cold water stratification. So the water has that ability to support cold water fish like trout long term. They can stay there, and in the summer, the water doesn't get warm. They can swim down and stay in that cool water that they like. So it leads for a nice habitat for a lot of different fish. You can see once again bass species and panfish. So all four lakes have very similar structure with the fish. One question that actually me and Jacqueline had talked about recently was, I guess they used to have a huge population of rainbow smelt in Lake Quinsigamond, and it is recently, or not sure when, has gone a little bit downhill. And I'm sure if anyone here is wondering about that, I had talked to someone from Mass Wildlife, Jason Stolarski, and he was super helpful in hearing about what happened to the rainbow smelt and probably what happened to a few of these other species that weren't present in the angler survey. So that, especially the rainbow smelt, have a pretty complex life history where they spawn in small streams like around Lake Quinsigamond, and then when they get into a bigger life stage and they're looking for food and all of that, they go into the deeper water. So as the outside area was becoming established and the surrounding area was being developed, then the streams changed and causing the population of smelt to change as well. So we're almost positive that they're still present, but story is that apparently you used to be able to dip your bucket in and pull out all these smelt. So they're most likely still present. So if anyone was wondering about that, that's the story behind it. But Lake Quinsigamond also stocks multiple species. They stock those tiger muskies, northern pike, which I know are big game fish, as well as trout in the spring and the fall. So plenty of time for good fishing for that, and then those can live long term with the cold water. If you wouldn't mind going to the next one. So I just gave a little overview of everything you would find in all four of the lakes, and this is based on the angler survey again. I know it's a little bit smaller to read, so I'll give you a second to look it over, but I split it up by the diet of each of the species. So you kind of want a nice spread of fish between all of the different diets. You don't want too many predators, those carnivores in the lake that'll be eating up all the smaller fish, and you don't want too many of the smaller fish that are eating the zooplankton and stuff like that. You want a nice mix, and you can see that all four of the lakes and ponds have a nice spread of everything. Nothing is missing, not everything is a predator, not everything's eating those algae or zooplankton or everything. So everything looks great right now. I'll give you another second to look at it. I know the lettering is pretty small, but it's the only way I could fit it all into the same slide. All right, and then lastly, we have our best game fish. So obviously the point of this presentation was to draw in those anglers and kind of see what you can be catching. So we have our trout, which is huge game fish. It's stocked in 3 out of 4 of the lakes we studied. Largemouth and smallmouth bass as well. And then the common carp, which apparently isn't a normal game fish, I guess you have to use a different type of fishing gear from what I understand. But I have also heard that a lot of people do like fishing for carp because of their larger size and they put up a good fight. So it could be something you could do for fun with that. And carp do cause a little bit of a problem, which I'll talk about on the next slide. I also wanted to take a second to talk about that sport fishing awards that I looked over when I was looking for this. So we do have a lot of good things coming from the sport fishing awards. We have some pretty big fish in the lakes. For Indian Lake, we have some yellow perch that can get up to 16 inches, some black crappie that go from 14 to 16 inches. In Quinsigamond, we have some carp that can get up to 39 inches, which seems pretty insane to me. That would seem like a great fish to catch. Tiger muskies can get up to 47 inches. That was the biggest one on record I could see. Bell Pond has some pretty big largemouth bass getting up to 21 inches. And Coes has some bullheads at 13 inches and once again some carp at 31 inches. And then this last slide right here, going over some quick recommendations for how we can keep the lakes looking this good with their wide variety of fish species. We can improve the dissolved oxygen levels. So that comes with reducing the nutrients in the water column that fuels the algae blooms, which Jacqueline, I'm sure we'll touch on that after we have our alum dosing station. And that also connects in with reducing the algae blooms. So that comes with routine monitoring. That comes with treating it with stuff like that, with algicides and herbicides and stuff like that when it happens during the summer with the warm weather. Just keeping an eye on that. For someone as a personal thing you can do, just keeping an eye on the lake, reporting it if it looks or smells funny, anything like that. And then the large algae blooms can cause fish kills and water closure. So keeping the fish nice and healthy is our top priority, especially for all you anglers going out there. And then along with that as well, restoring open water access. So a lot of those desired fish, like the sunfish, love the open space. They use it for spawning. They use it to catch food and to live in. So those invasive species and lots of plants can crowd up the area and leave less space and can stunt those smaller fish. So keeping the water open, doing some plant surveys to see what's in the lake, especially invasive species wise, and then taking care of those appropriately. And then for more lake specific recommendations, carp control. So I know Indian Lake has quite a big carp population, and carp are actually, they like to live in the smaller cove areas and in the muck and grossness, and they really stir everything up and make it a they don't help the water quality. They're not going to be helping get the water to a nice state, which we like it at. So anyone who's interested in learning to fish, maybe take up some carp fishing because that's only going to help everyone. And then some of the comments we got from the angler survey said people love how we're stocking the trout and they love the trout populations and it leads for great fishing. So by continuing to stock the trout at the different lakes and stuff, it can lead to some great days fishing on the lake and some great times for all our anglers everywhere. So, and with that, I think that was my last slide, and I'm going to hand it back to Jacqueline so she can wrap us up.
Right. Thank you so much, Morgan. I wanted to give people a chance to ask some questions if they had any. If anyone wants to raise their hand or type a question into the chat box for Morgan.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we have a question from Dan Giza. Dan asked, Mass Wildlife didn't indicate why they were surveying.
No, they didn't. They passed over their Excel notes to me, so it wasn't like a it was just like their basic notes from the field, so they didn't indicate why they were surveying. I'm guessing for the total pickups, they were trying to just get a screenshot of what was in the lake. And I'm also guessing that for the selective ones, like when they were just looking at largemouth bass or something like that, they were just checking in to see if they were stunted or smaller. I know a lot of people tend to call them and say like, oh, the fish looks smaller in this lake or something like that. So they could always be checking up on that or the overall fish health. But that's just me speculating. They seem to do these surveys pretty regularly to just check up on what's in the lake, especially when it comes to stocking and all of that.
Great. Well, thanks, Morgan. That was really great to know that our fish populations are doing so well. You brought up some really good points about things that can be done to improve our fish health. So I wanted to just take a quick moment before we ended to summarize some of the city's efforts on that front. So Morgan mentioned that reducing algae and cyanobacteria blooms would help increase oxygen levels in our water bodies. Unfortunately, harmful algal blooms are indeed becoming more frequent in New England, which is leading to the closures of our waterways for recreation, and that's not great for fishing either. For that reason, we're taking steps to monitor and manage the situation in order to better understand why these blooms are happening and protect fish and public health. The city is monitoring Coes Reservoir and Indian Lake, which are both at elevated risk for cyanobacteria blooms. We're doing that semi-monthly. Additionally, we have a team of committed volunteer community scientists, the Worcester Cyanobacteria Monitoring Collaborative, that are collecting monthly samples at 11 or more of our local lakes. If these results suggest that there is a cyanobacteria bloom occurring, we close the lakes to public access to prevent interaction with potentially dangerous toxins. In order to lower the chance that harmful algal blooms occur, we're identifying places to build green infrastructure, things like rain gardens or pervious pavement, things that intercept and naturally filter stormwater from our streets and parking lot before it carries pollutants, which cause these blooms to our lakes and streams. We also perform lake treatments to prevent the buildup of algae feeding nutrients into the water, or to kill off blooms before they become problematic in size. And finally, we do want to reduce the use of chemicals that we're using in our lakes. So we are building that alum dosing station on Indian Lake to more efficiently apply these compounds to the water so that it's more clean and clear with less of those compounds. Another suggestion by ESS was to open up more water for fish. One of the ways to do that is to manage invasive vegetation or plants that are not native and are out competing local plants and animals for space. And unfortunately, we do have some challenges with invasive species in Worcester. Invasive plants are expensive problem to solve once they're established, so preventing them from entering a water body or identifying them quickly is a priority, and we spend time doing aquatic vegetation surveys almost annually to catch those invasives early and create educational materials for people to recognize them and teach them how to prevent their spread from water body to water body. For the non-native plants that have become established, we have created integrated management plans for the removal using mechanical and other methods. This includes the use of mechanical harvesters, which are pretty much giant lawnmowers to chop up that vegetation and remove it from the lake, as well as underwater suction harvesting. We're using underwater vacuums that we can use to suck up these invasives by the roots, and we're able to discern between what's native and what's invasive, and really get it at the root. The drawdown is another method that we use in some lakes. This is when we lower the lake water level during the wintertime to expose those plants to the New England cold, which is generally disagreeable to those invasive plants. that are used to warmer climates. And finally, when we have to, we do use herbicides that are specifically targeting those invasive plants and leaving the native ones to flourish and provide that habitat for our fish populations. Does anyone have any questions on that? Oh, we have another question on the smelt, wondering if the city is paying any attention to rebuild the smelt population by managing some of the Quinsig tributaries. We don't have any specific plans for the smelt population right now, but we are looking at opportunities to improve the tributaries where we can. Most recently, we are looking to build a project on Coal Mine Brook that will hopefully intercept some of the stormwater there and slow the amount of stormwater that is going off of Lake Ave North into that tributary. We have another question about what species of cyanobacteria do you typically find if you know? We are in the process of trying to better understand our cyanobacteria populations. That's one of the things the Worcester Cyanobacteria Monitoring Collaborative does. We do see a lot of microcystis. We see a lot of aphenomenazon, and we have a lot of Anabaena as well. So those are the ones that we see the most in our water bodies. Any other questions? So in conclusion, Worcester's fisheries are strong and attractive to anglers, and the city is working to keep it that way with these various projects. If you're interested in learning more about the challenges that we're facing and the initiatives that we have at the lakes and ponds, those different projects on our tributaries, as well as things like the alum dosing station, I really recommend that you come to our annual State of the Lakes event. That's taking place on April 20th. It's a virtual event, and you can register on the bottom left of the screen using the QR code. It's also on the Eventbrite page where you went to register for this event. If you are interested in reading more about the fish history report, that report will be uploaded. It's actually there now on the Lakes and Ponds website. You could get to that using the QR code on the bottom right of the screen. If you like this event, please join us for our next Angler Series event, which focuses specifically on how those algae and cyanobacteria are affecting fish health. That event is co-hosted by the Indian Lake Watershed Association and Mass Wildlife. And you could register for that at wooanglerseries.com, which is up there on the top of the screen, just where you registered for this one. And finally, I encourage you all to check out your local watershed association, where you can learn of other upcoming events and what your community is doing to keep our blue spaces beautiful.